My name is Margaret Ellis. I am 67 years old, and I live alone in a weathered wooden house near the cliffs of Oregon. Every morning, the wind carries the scent of cedar and sea breeze through the open windows, and the sound of crashing waves is the first thing I hear. It is quiet here, peaceful, some might say, but peace can sometimes hide the loneliest kind of silence. My husband passed 8 years ago, and this house became the last piece of our life together. My son Eric and my daughter Julia are my pride, my reason to keep going. They both built their own lives, and I told myself that was enough. I believed they loved me. I believed I was safe. But if you stay with me until the end of this story, you'll learn what I discovered: how love can turn into something unrecognizable inside the very walls you call home. That morning, as the tide rolled in, everything still looked calm. I didn't know the first crack in my world was already forming just above my head. The days in my little cliffside house follow a rhythm as steady as the tide itself. I wake before the sun, make a pot of coffee, and watch the waves crawl across the rocks below. The air always smells of cedar and salt, and the gulls cry as if telling the same story over and over. My mornings are quiet sometimes, too quiet. I sit by the window and wrap my hands around the warm cup, just to feel something that still holds warmth. My husband used to sit across from me. He'd hum old country tunes while reading the paper, and we'd talk about small things: the fog, the yard, the mailman's silly dog. He's been gone 8 years now, but some mornings I still make 2 cups out of habit. The second one always goes cold. Around mid-morning, my friend Betty usually stops by. She's 70, round in the middle, always wearing her wide-brimmed garden hat no matter the season. "Morning, Margaret," she says, waving through the porch screen. She brings banana bread or fresh preserves, sometimes just her company. We sit on her porch, watching the Pacific's slow dance. "You're lucky," she often says. "This view could heal anything." I smile, though I know it hasn't healed me. Across the lane lives Howard, 73, a retired sheriff's deputy with a limp from an old highway accident. He's the quiet, sturdy kind, the type who fixes what's broken without asking. He checks my fence after a storm, brings split wood before the rain settles in. Sometimes we share stew and stories: how Oregon used to feel smaller, how folks used to drop by unannounced just to say hi. The town itself moves like molasses. Kids ride their bikes through gravel streets. The mailman waves without slowing down, and the little chapel bell rings at noon every Friday. It's peaceful. But peace is a tricky thing. It can soothe you or make you feel invisible. My children, Eric and Julia, live 2 towns away. They've both carved out lives for themselves, with jobs that sound too complicated for me to understand. I tell myself it means I did right by them. But when weeks slide past without a single knock on the door, when phone calls shrink to minutes, I can't help but wonder if I mattered. Eric talks to me like I'm glass, like one wrong word might crack me. "You don't need to worry, Mom," he says. "I've got it all handled." Julia's voice is softer, but her calls always end the same: "I'll come by soon, promise." That promise hangs in the room like a picture frame turned face down. In the evenings, I cook light soups, or salmon if I get to the fishmonger early. I eat by the kitchen window, the radio low in the background just to push the silence away. The clock ticks like it's trying to fill the room. After dinner, I scrub the sink, fold the towel, straighten the chairs. Then I sit again, in the same spot, and let the moonlight pour over the cliffs. Sometimes, for just a moment, I feel almost full. Almost. There's comfort in routine, but routine can be dangerous. When everything feels calm, you stop looking deeper. You stop noticing the cracks. You start believing calm means safe. I still think about the last time they both came. It was Mother's Day. They brought tulips and smiles, but their minds were somewhere else. I remember Eric checking his emails, Julia rambling about a merger at work. I told them I didn't want gifts. I wanted time. They promised to stay longer next time. But next time never came. Still, I love them. That's what mothers do. We keep loving, even when we're the only ones holding on. If you've ever sat alone in a quiet house, waiting for a voice that never calls, maybe you'll understand me. It's not anger I feel. It's a quiet ache, like a tide that reaches the shore but never touches land. Stay with me through this story. The stillness you hear in my home is not what it seems. Underneath it, something was growing, something I didn't notice until it almost took me. And if you believe every story has a lesson, please like this video and subscribe, because what I found beneath that quiet was a silence with intent. That night, the ocean roared louder than usual. I tossed in bed. The walls creaked like they were whispering something I wasn't ready to hear. I told myself it was just the wind. But the next morning, as I poured my coffee, I saw a faint stain blooming across the ceiling above the sink. Just a shadow at first, but by sunrise it had become something else. It started on an ordinary morning, the kind I'd lived through 1,000 times before. The gulls screamed over the cliffs, the wind rattled the shutters, and the scent of strong coffee filled the kitchen. But that day, something was off. When I looked up, I saw a dark patch spreading across the ceiling above the sink. The paint bubbled just slightly, and when I reached up to touch it, the plaster felt damp and tender under my fingers. I pulled my hand away, confused. It hadn't rained in nearly a week. I grabbed a towel and tried to wipe it, but water beat it again, slow and stubborn. It looked harmless, just a leak maybe, but it made my stomach turn. This old house had stood strong through windstorms and Pacific rain, yet something about that darkening shape above me unsettled everything inside. I called my son Eric. "Sweetheart, I think there's a leak upstairs. The ceiling's wet." His voice came through calm, almost rehearsed. "It's probably just condensation from the vents, Mom. Don't stress about it." "I was thinking of calling a plumber," I said. "Just to be sure." He cut me off quickly. "No, Mom, don't do that. I'll send one of my guys over tomorrow. Just hold tight, all right?" I hesitated. "But what if it gets worse?" "Mom," he said with a sharper tone now, "please, I've got it handled. Don't call anyone else." That edge in his voice stopped me. Eric had always spoken with confidence, maybe too much of it. I'd heard that tone before. It was the same one his father used to use, the kind that wrapped control in a velvet cloth. So I said, "Okay, honey, I'll wait." When I hung up, the house suddenly felt hollow. The hum of the fridge, the tick of the old wall clock, and somewhere overhead, the faintest sound of dripping like a heartbeat in the ceiling. I tried to let it go. I told myself Eric was right. But still, something about the way he said don't call anyone else stuck with me. That evening, I sat by the window and watched the sun drop below the waterline. The sky turned deep crimson, the same hue Henry used to paint the garden shed years ago. For a moment, I could hear him mutter, "Fix what's broken before it breaks you." I smiled at the thought, but when I looked up again, that smile slipped. The stain had grown darker. I thought about calling Julia, but I didn't. She always sounded worn thin these days, the hospital pulling every ounce of her. I didn't want to add more to her plate. That's the thing about mothers we keep guarding, even when we're the ones bleeding. That night, the smell changed. Not just wet wood anymore, there was something chemical beneath it, metallic. I walked through the rooms, throwing windows open, whispering to myself it was just sea air playing tricks. But the discomfort stayed with me like wet clothes clinging to skin. When I finally laid down, I couldn't sleep. The house made sounds it hadn't made before, timid creaks, soft echoes, like it was holding its breath. I even thought I heard a low hum from below the floorboards. I sat up, listening, but the sound disappeared. Maybe it was in my head, or maybe it wasn't. Morning came cold and dull. The air inside was heavy, as if it hadn't moved all night. I poured my coffee and tried not to glance up, but my eyes drifted anyway. The stain had grown a pale ring now circled it, like a bruise swelling on skin. I touched the wall, damp, all the way down. That's when I knew. I couldn't brush it off anymore. I would wait for Eric's man. Yes, but I made a quiet promise to myself. If I didn't like what he said, I'd call someone I trusted. Trouble doesn't always knock. Sometimes it whispers, sometimes it drips. And if you've ever ignored your gut just to keep your children from worrying, then you know what I mean. Stay with me. What happened next proved that a mother's instinct, however faint, is rarely wrong. The next morning, a van pulled into the gravel driveway, painted on the side, Ellis Home Services, LLC. A tall man stepped out, wiping his hands on a cloth. He wore a smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Morning, ma'am," he said. "Your son sent me over about the ceiling." And just like that, the calm world I knew began to change. He didn't look like trouble at first. The man who stepped through my door that morning wore a pressed shirt, a calm smile, and carried a clipboard under one arm. He said his name was Rick Dalton, one of Eric's contractors. His boots were too clean, his hands too smooth. Everything about him was too polished for someone who claimed to fix plumbing leaks. He glanced at the ceiling, gave a quick nod, as if he already knew what to say. "Doesn't look too bad," he murmured. "Just some moisture. Happens all the time in these coastal homes." "Do you need to check upstairs?" I asked. He shook his head. "No, ma'am. No need to worry." He didn't bring in a toolbox, didn't climb a ladder. Instead, he reached into his bag, pulled out a small can of paint, and began covering the damp patch with smooth, practiced strokes. The scent of fresh paint filled the kitchen thick, sugary, but under it I caught another smell, something faint, metallic, chemical. A whisper of doubt stirred in me. "Shouldn't you see where the leak's coming from?" I asked again. He paused mid-stroke, turned slightly toward me, smiled, but the smile stopped at his mouth. "Your son says you worry a bit too much, Mrs. Ellis. It's nothing." And that was it. He finished painting, packed his things, and walked out with barely a word. No inspection, no questions, no invoice, gone. As his van disappeared down the gravel road, the house returned to silence, but it wasn't the same silence. It felt loaded, like something unsaid was still hanging in the air. I looked up at the ceiling. Fresh white paint. Perfect. But I could still see the outline of the stain beneath, faint as a fading bruise. That night, I tried to believe what Eric always said. "Don't worry, Mom, I've got it covered." I'd heard it so often it had become a lullaby. But lately, it felt less like comfort and more like control. I made tea and curled up in the corner of the living room, listening to the sea crash against the cliffs. The wind howled, stronger than usual, like it was trying to tell me something. I glanced at the vents, noticed for the first time how warm the air felt, too warm for late November. I adjusted the thermostat, but nothing changed. I called Eric, mentioned it to him. "Mom, seriously, you're overthinking this." Rick said it's fine. "Just relax, okay?" I wanted to tell him the smell wasn't right, that my sleep had been uneasy for nights now, but his tone stopped me. Cold. Final. "Okay," I whispered. "If you're sure." After we hung up, I sat alone in the dark. I felt foolish for opening my door to a stranger just because my son said so. I used to think trust was part of love, but now it felt like a risk. The next morning, Betty came by with her little dog. The moment she stepped inside, her nose wrinkled. "Margaret, something's off. Smells strange. Not paint, not mildew either." I told her everything: the ceiling, the man Eric sent, how quickly he was in and out. She frowned deeply. "He didn't check the plumbing at all? That's ridiculous. I know someone. Honest guy, been working around town forever. Name's Tom Alvarez. You want the truth, call him." I hesitated. "Eric told me not to bring anyone else in." She met my eyes. "Honey, this is your home, not his. If you feel something's wrong, you don't need permission to protect yourself." Her words clung to me after she left. I walked the house slowly, fingertips trailing across the walls, near the vents, the windows. The chemical smell had thickened. My throat burned faintly now. I turned on the ceiling fan, but the air just looped it back around. That night, sleep didn't come. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Rick's blank face. I heard Eric's voice, not soft, not kind, firm, distant. And for the first time since becoming a mother, a question rose inside me, one I didn't want to ask. What if my own child wasn't protecting me anymore? What if he was hiding something? If you were in my shoes, if someone you loved told you not to ask questions, even when your gut screamed something was wrong, what would you do? Would you stay silent? Or would you dig for the truth? Type yes if you'd trust them. Type no if you'd start asking questions, no matter the cost. The next morning came gray and low, the kind of sky that presses itself over the cliffs until even the gulls stop calling. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the ceiling. The fresh coat Rick had applied just the day before was already bubbling. Fine cracks crept from the corner, and from one of them, a thin bead of water formed and dropped, landing with a soft plop beside my cup. Before I could think too much, the porch creaked. "Margaret?" It was Betty, her voice cheerful and solid despite the weather. She stepped in, holding a plate wrapped in foil. "Brought you some cornbread. Figured you could use a little company." As soon as she walked in, her nose wrinkled. "Oh my Lord, what is that smell?" "I don't know," I said. "It's been like this ever since that man came." She set the plate down and sniffed again. That's not paint. Not mold either. It's chemical, sharp, doesn't belong. I nodded, though I didn't want to believe it. He told me it was just condensation. Condensation doesn't burn your nose like that, she said firmly. You need a second opinion. I sighed. Eric told me not to bring anyone else in. Betty crossed her arms. Eric doesn't live in this house, Margaret. You do. You're breathing this in every hour. You've got every right to protect yourself. Her voice softened. I know a man, Tom Alvarez. Local plumber. Been working this stretch of the coast for decades. Good man, honest, knows what he's doing. Let me call him. Eric's words echoed in my head. Don't call anyone else, Mom. But then I looked back up at the ceiling, the cracks, the stain, the water, and something in me changed. Maybe trust wasn't love anymore. Call him, I said quietly. Betty smiled, patted my hand. You won't regret it. She promised to send Tom over that same afternoon if he was free. Once she left, the silence returned, thicker than before. I poured another cup, didn't touch it. My hands wouldn't stop trembling. I walked to the window. The sea was dark, angry. The waves didn't roll, they struck, as if demanding something from the land. By late afternoon, a white pickup pulled up. A shorter man climbed out, built like a barrel, with kind, weathered eyes and silver at his temples. He removed his cap and wiped his boots on the mat before knocking. Mrs. Ellis? He asked. I'm Tom Alvarez. Betty said you've got a leak giving you trouble. Yes, I said, exhaling for what felt like the first time all day. Please, come in. He gave a small nod and scanned the kitchen. Where's the issue? I pointed up. He studied the spot, knocked lightly on the wall, then frowned. Doesn't feel right. May I check upstairs? Of course. He took the steps slowly, methodically. I followed a few feet behind. He opened cabinet doors, ran the faucet, touched the pipes, then his brow furrowed. It's not coming from here, he said. If it's all right with you, I'd like to check the basement. My chest tightened. The basement? Yes, ma'am. Whatever's causing this, it's moving upward, not down. His voice was steady, kind. I nodded. Door's just off the kitchen. He gave a gentle smile. I'll be careful. No need for you to come down. He disappeared through the basement door, flashlight in hand. I watched the faint glow from beneath the door. I heard a few clinks, the scrape of boxes, shifting wood, then nothing. Time dragged. The clock ticked. The kettle started to hum. Still, he didn't come back. Finally, his boots thudded softly on the stairs. When he appeared again, his face had changed. He removed his cap, wiped his brow, his eyes calm, honest eyes looked troubled. Mrs. Ellis, he said gently, I think you should come down and see this. My stomach dropped. Is it bad? He hesitated. It's unexpected. I started to speak, but he raised a hand. Please, just come see, but step carefully. The sound of the ocean outside had vanished. All I could hear was the low hum of the house itself, like it had a breath of its own. I followed him, slowly, toward the basement. My fingers brushed the wall as I steadied myself on the steps. If it were you standing at the edge of something you didn't understand, with your home suddenly unfamiliar, would you go down those stairs? Type yes if you would have gone. Type no if you would have stayed behind the door. When Tom reached the bottom, his flashlight swept the floor. He froze. I hadn't even stepped fully down when I heard the change in his voice. Ma'am, he said slowly, there's something down here that doesn't belong. And in that moment, the house I thought I knew, the life I thought I had shifted forever. The silence in the house was so deep, I could hear the old clock ticking in the kitchen. I stood at the top of the basement stairs, my fingers gripping the railing so hard my knuckles turned white. The air rising up from below was strange, sharp, metallic, damp. It smelled like something that should never burn. When Tom finally came back up, his face was pale as driftwood. He didn't speak at first. He removed his cap and pressed it to his chest, breathing heavy. Mrs. Ellis, he said at last, voice tight and low, there's something down there that isn't plumbing. My stomach dropped. What do you mean? He motioned for me to follow. You need to see it for yourself. Just be careful. Step where I step. We descended slowly. Each step creaked beneath our weight. His flashlight danced across the stone walls, catching cobwebs and dust, until we reached the bottom. That's when I saw it. Pipes and wires snaked across the ceiling. Silver, sterile, gleaming like something from a lab, not a home. They twisted together and led to a small metal tank mounted on the wall. Not old, not worn. Clean, new. Tom crouched beside it and pointed. "See this?" he said. "This tank's pressurized, connected to a feed line that runs straight into your air system up toward the bedroom." My voice barely broke the silence. "What is it?" He hesitated. "Gas canister, industrial grade. And this," he gestured to a tiny black device wired to it, "is a timer. Someone set it to release something through your vents." I staggered. The basement blurred. "No," I whispered. "That can't be." Tom's jaw clenched. "Whoever installed this knew what they were doing. This isn't amateur work." He looked at me, eyes kind, but grave. "Mrs. Ellis, I believe someone's been poisoning you." It didn't register at first. Not really. Poisoning. The word sounded too dramatic, too unreal. I was just tired, dizzy sometimes, but not poisoned. Then I remembered the headaches, the choking air, the weight in my chest, the nights I couldn't sleep. And Eric, telling me to stop worrying. "My son had this place inspected," I said, voice shaking. "He sent someone." Tom's face darkened. "Was that the tall man with the clipboard? Never brought a toolbox?" I nodded. He looked away. "Then this wasn't a mistake." I stared at the tank, the little red light blinking steady as a heartbeat. My knees nearly buckled. All this time, my home hadn't been a sanctuary. It had been a trap. I pressed my hand to my mouth. "Dear God." Tom steadied me gently. "Let's get you upstairs, but don't touch anything. If this was planned, whoever set it up might be watching for changes." The hum of the house felt louder now, heavier, like it was holding its breath. I glanced at the shelves: Henry's old hammer, photo albums, the wooden horse Eric rode when he was 3. Everything down there looked smaller now, like evidence. Tom checked the timer again. "It releases gas at intervals, probably when you're asleep. That's why you're sick." I sat on the lowest step, body trembling. "Why would someone do this, Tom? I haven't hurt anyone." He knelt beside me. "Sometimes, people want something they can't wait for. A house, an inheritance, insurance money." The word money echoed. I thought of the documents Eric had asked me to sign, the way Julia couldn't look me in the eye during her last visit, the rushed tone in Eric's voice, the painted ceiling, the man named Rick. I didn't say anything, but the pieces were falling into place. Tom rose. "We shouldn't stay. The air's toxic. You need to breathe clean again." He helped me up the stairs. My knees felt soft, like they didn't belong to me. When we reached the kitchen, I threw open every window. Cold ocean air rushed in, curling the curtains, blessing the walls with movement. Tom closed the basement door. "You can't stay here tonight." I looked at the chipped mug on the counter, the photos above the sink, the dent in the chair Henry used to sit in. This was my home. "But this is all I have," I whispered. He nodded. "And we'll protect it, but not from inside." I turned my face to the wind. The sea beyond the cliffs sounded louder now, wilder, like it was warning me, or maybe cheering me on. "Would you have left, knowing your children, your own children, might be behind it all? If you would have stayed and fought, type yes. If you would have walked away forever, type no." Tom stood quietly, hand on the doorknob, waiting for me. I just needed one more minute to say goodbye to the version of my life that had just died. And tomorrow, I would begin again. Tom held the basement door open and waited for me to steady myself. I could feel the cold air rising from below, damp and metallic, as if the house were breathing through a wounded lung. I wrapped my fingers around the railing and followed the beam of his flashlight down the steps. Each tread complained under my weight, a tired groan, a reminder that the house had seen more years than I wanted to count. I went slowly, placing my feet where Tom placed his, trying not to think about what waited at the bottom. "Careful," he said quietly. "Watch your step on the last 2. The light found the concrete floor, then swept over the old tool bench Henry built when the children were small. I recognized every stain on that wood. Paint from a summer project, oil from the old mower. A faint mark where Eric carved his initials when he was 10 and cried after I scolded him. For a moment, memory warmed me like sunlight on an old porch. Then the light moved on, and the warmth left me. Tom stopped beside the far wall. His flashlight held steady on a neat assembly of pipes and wires. The metal gleamed like something polished for show. The thin tube rose toward the ceiling, disappearing exactly beneath the spot where my bedroom sat above. A small canister clung to the wall in a steel cradle. A black box with a blinking red light blinked again, then again, steady as a heartbeat. "There," he said, "that's the source." I moved closer because people do foolish things when they need proof. The canister was about the size of a paint can. Its fittings looked new. No dust, no rust, nothing to suggest it had ever lived in a basement like mine. My house keeps a language of dust. This thing did not speak it. "What does it do?" I asked, though I already knew. "It releases gas on a schedule," Tom said. He pointed to the wires. "Timer here, valve here. The line feeds into your vent up there. Whoever put this in wanted control, wanted patience. Patience. That word hurt worse than any other. Patience meant time to plan, to think, to test. Patience meant someone smiled at me upstairs while something downstairs measured the hours of my life. Tom shifted the light to a shelf near the canister. A heavy toolbox sat there, squared to the edge like a soldier at attention. The metal was brushed clean. On the lid, letters were stamped into the steel. Ellis Contracting and Renovation, LLC. I reached out, then drew my hand back, as if the name might burn me. "That's my son's company," I said. My voice did not sound like my own. It sounded thinner, smaller, as if it too were losing air. Tom did not touch the box. "I know," he said. "I'm sorry." My knees trembled. I braced myself against Henry's bench and counted breaths until the dizziness passed. Each breath tasted like the inside of a battery. I shut my eyes, and for a moment I was back at the kitchen table 20 years ago, peeling apples while Eric bragged about his first big job. He had smiled so wide. He had promised to take care of me when I was old. When I opened my eyes, Tom had moved the light to the work table. Papers lay in a tidy stack there, held down by a wrench. I could see the neat lines of a chart. Numbers, dates, notes in a careful hand. Tom lifted the wrench, then stepped back so I could see without touching. "Look," he said gently. The top page was a schedule written in blue ink. Dosage. Duration. Vent cycles marked by day and hour. Some lines had small corrections, the kind nurses make when they change a medication. The handwriting was not Eric's block letters. It was rounded, clean, and painfully familiar. "Julia's." My hand went to my throat. "That's my daughter's writing," I whispered. I would know it in the dark. The room shrank around me. The walls moved closer. The red light blinked again, patient as a metronome. I could hear Henry's voice in my memory, low and steady. "If something feels wrong, Maggie, look it in the eye." He had called me Maggie when we were young and foolish. I felt a sob rise, then swallow itself back down. "Why would they do this?" I asked. The question came out raw. What could make my own children? I could not finish. The words were heavier than the air. Tom lowered the light, as if to soften the moment. "I don't know yet," he said. "But I think this paper and that toolbox tell us who. We'll need to be careful now, we'll need to get help, and we'll need to do it the right way." I reached for the stack, then stopped. "Should we take it?" "Not yet," he said. "We should photograph, not disturb. Let the evidence sit where it is until the right people see it." I nodded. My palm flattened on Henry's bench again. The wood was cool, worn smooth by years of hands more capable than mine. I stared at the old rocking horse in the corner, its paint chipped where Eric's heels had rubbed. Julia had tied a red ribbon to its ear when she was 5. The ribbon was still there, faded to something like pink smoke. "I raised them to be kind," I said. "We had very little, but we had kindness." "I believe you," Tom said. "And I believe something turned them." I did not ask what. I already knew the list people recite when they lose their compass. Money. Pride. Fear. A future they think they deserve. Paper promises written in numbers with too many zeros. The house creaked above us, a soft thud, like a door settling into its frame. I flinched. Tom lifted the light toward the stairs and listened. Silence returned, thick and certain. He looked back at me. "Mrs. Ellis, are you all right to go up?" I was not. But mothers say yes when the truth demands it. "Yes," I said. "Let me take one last look." I took in the whole scene. The canister, the tube, the red light, the company name stamped into the box like a verdict, the blue ink that shaped my daughter's hand. Then I turned toward the steps and began to climb. Halfway up, I paused. The air from the kitchen drifted down, cooler, cleaner, not yet free. I listened to the low hum and tried to map every choice that had led us here. Maybe I had loved too quietly. Maybe I had trusted too loudly. Maybe I had mistaken control for care because it came in a familiar voice. At the top, Tom closed the basement door gently, as if not to wake something sleeping behind it. We stood in the kitchen without speaking. The light through the window was thin. The sea beyond the glass moved like a tired animal. Tom cleared his throat. "We'll need to document everything," he said. "Photos, notes, times. Then we'll call people I trust. We'll move step by step." I nodded. My voice would not form words. I poured water and did not drink it. I laid my hand on the kitchen table and felt the old grooves where Henry's coffee cups had once lived. If you stood where I stood, if the proof lay 10 feet below your feet with your children's names whispering from it, would you still want every answer? Or would you stop here and try to forget? Tell me yes or no. I wonder what courage looks like to other people. Tom reached for his phone, then paused. "In a few minutes," he said softly. "First, breathe." So I breathed. 1, 2, 3. Slow, steady, stubborn. The kind of breathing you do to keep standing when your world has shifted an inch off its foundation. The kind of breathing you learn when you've lived long enough to know that pain arrives like weather. It comes. It stays. It passes. I sat down, folded my hands, and stared at the basement door. The house felt unfamiliar now, like a polite stranger wearing my husband's sweater. Somewhere beneath, the red light kept time. Above, the ocean pounded the shore. Between the two, I waited. When Tom finally lifted the phone and opened the camera, I looked away. The click of each photo sounded like a small nail in a long, careful plan. A plan that was not mine. A plan that had been built under my roof, in the dark, while I slept. He set the phone down. "We'll do this right," he said. "One step at a time." I nodded again. The ache behind my ribs deepened, wide and slow, like tide pulling out. I knew the name for it now. Not shock, not anger. Something older, the beginning of grief. And as that feeling rose, quiet and certain, I understood what the next hours would hold. Not action, not escape, but the simple weight of knowing. The weight a mother carries when love turns its face away. The weight of sitting still, while the truth finishes arriving. That was how the night gathered itself around us, no shouting, no running, only breath and proof. And in that gathering dark, the pain began to find its shape, leading me toward the long, silent room where a mother finally lets herself feel. The kitchen felt different after we came back up from the basement, emptier, like all the warmth had drained through the cracks in the floor. I sat at the table where I'd eaten breakfast that morning and stared at the cup still sitting there, half full, the ring of coffee drying into a perfect circle. My body was here, but my mind was somewhere between disbelief and the slow, creeping truth that wouldn't let me breathe. Tom stood by the counter, arms folded, his flashlight resting beside the sink. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound between us. He didn't rush me. He didn't tell me to calm down or to be strong. He just waited, letting the silence do what words couldn't. "All those headaches," I finally said. "The dizziness, the way I'd wake up in the middle of the night and feel like the air was too thick to breathe. I thought it was grief, or maybe the years catching up." Tom's voice was steady, careful. "It wasn't you, Mrs. Ellis. It was the air itself." I turned toward him. "But why? Why would they do that? They're my children." The words came out half broken. "I gave them everything I had." He hesitated before answering. "Sometimes people lose themselves chasing something they think they need. Maybe money, maybe freedom, maybe something they can't even name." I looked down at my hands. The skin was thin, the veins rising like rivers on a map. These were the hands that had wiped fevers from their foreheads, packed their school lunches, signed the papers that built this life. "And they used them," I whispered, "to build that thing." Tom didn't answer. He didn't have to. The truth already sat between us, heavy as the sea outside. Minutes passed, maybe hours. The light changed, slipping from gray to amber, then to blue again as evening drew closer. Every sound in the house, the ticking clock, the groan of the boards felt louder, sharper. My mind replayed every conversation I'd had with Eric and Julia in the last year, hunting for signs I'd missed. Eric had asked about my insurance. I'd brushed it off. Julia had insisted I stop using the upstairs room, said the stairs were too dangerous for me. I thought she was being protective. I thought they cared. A thin laugh escaped me, quiet, joyless. They must have thought it would be quick, I said. Slow enough to look natural, but quick enough not to wait too long. Tom came closer and set a gentle hand on my shoulder. You're safe for now, he said. And you're not alone in this. I'll help however I can. Something inside me cracked at those words, not from fear this time, but from gratitude. A stranger cared more for my life than my own blood. I nodded, unable to speak. He poured a glass of water and placed it before me. My hand trembled so badly the glass rattled. He steadied it with his own. The small act nearly undid me. I should have seen it, I said quietly. A mother is supposed to know her children. I looked into their faces and didn't see what they'd become. No one sees it, Tom said softly. Not until it's right in front of them. I thought of Henry, then my husband, gone 8 years now. He would have known something was wrong. He always could sense a storm before it broke. I could almost hear him saying, Maggie, trust your gut before you trust anyone else. He was the only one who ever called me Maggie. The memory of his voice was enough to make my throat close. I keep hearing him, I murmured. If he were here, this wouldn't have happened. Tom's eyes softened. Maybe not, but you're here now and you still have a choice about what happens next. I nodded, though the motion felt heavy. I'm too tired for choices. You're tired, he said, but you're alive. That's what they didn't count on. Outside, the wind picked up. The curtains fluttered like pale wings. I could smell the salt of the sea through the open window. It should have been comforting. Instead, it made me think of the vents, of the gas seeping into my lungs while I slept. The thought made my stomach twist. Tom turned to close the basement door, pressing the latch firmly. We'll document everything, he said. Tomorrow, I'll take photos, call a friend who knows the right people to test that air. Tonight you rest. Rest. The word felt foreign. How could I rest knowing what lay beneath my floorboards? Still, I nodded because I had no strength left to argue. He reached the door but paused. Do you have family nearby? Anyone you can stay with? I shook my head. No one close, just Betty next door. Then maybe tomorrow you visit her for a while, he said. Get some distance from this place until we know more. I didn't answer. I was still staring at the table, at the faint grooves left by years of coffee cups and Sunday breakfasts. I imagined Eric sitting there as a boy, swinging his legs, asking if he could build a sandcastle after church. I imagined Julia laughing, her face sticky with jam. The memories were bright and unbearable. Tears came before I could stop them. They slid down my cheeks, quiet and steady. Tom didn't look away. He handed me a napkin and said nothing. For the first time since Henry died, I let someone see me cry. When the tears finally stopped, the air between us felt lighter, cleaner somehow. Tom looked at the clock. It's getting late, he said. Do you want me to stay a while? Just in case? I almost said yes, but something in me, the part that still wanted to believe I could stand on my own, refused. No, I said softly. You've done enough. I'll be fine. He studied me for a moment, then nodded. I'll be close. Call if you need me. When he left, the house swallowed the sound of his footsteps. I sat there for a long time, staring at the door he'd gone through. The sky outside was turning dark, the horizon fading into the color of slate. I rose slowly and walked through each room, touching the things that had once made this place feel alive. The quilt on the sofa, the photo of the kids at the fair, the chipped mug Henry always used. Everything was exactly as it had been, yet nothing was the same. Upstairs, the air felt heavier again. I opened every window wide. The sound of the ocean rushed in, filling the silence with something ancient and steady. I stood there, breathing it in, daring the air to feel clean again. For a moment, I imagined both of my children as they were when they were small, running barefoot through the sand, shouting my name, waving from the water. That was the memory I chose to keep tonight, not the one from the basement. Tomorrow would be different. Tomorrow, the truth would have to be faced. I sat on the edge of my bed, hands clasped, and whispered into the empty room, Henry, if you can hear me, give me strength. The floorboards creaked as the wind moved through the vents. I closed my eyes and let the sound carry me back to the days when love was simple, when I still believed my children would never hurt me. Somewhere in that half-sleep between exhaustion and sorrow, I understood that grief doesn't end, it only changes shape. Tonight, it settled around me like a blanket I couldn't fold away. Downstairs, the refrigerator hummed again, steady as a heartbeat. The house, despite everything, still breathed. And as the night deepened, I realized I would have to breathe with it one more time before deciding what to do next. Tomorrow, I would wake to a world that looked the same but wasn't. Tomorrow, the fight would begin. Night fell slowly over the Oregon coast, the kind of quiet darkness that makes every sound sharper. The sea was restless, throwing its rhythm against the cliffs like it was warning me not to stay. I sat in the living room with the lights off, the clock ticking toward 11. Every shadow in the house felt like it was listening. Every creak in the old boards made me hold my breath. Tom waited outside in his truck, engine off, lights out. We had agreed no phone calls, just a soft knock at the back door when it was time. I had packed everything into one small leather satchel. My identification, a few papers Henry had left behind, our wedding bands, and a handful of photos from when Eric and Julia were still innocent. I didn't need much, just enough to remember who I had been before the lies. When the clock struck 11, I stood. The floor groaned under me like it was saying goodbye. I walked through the house one last time, fingers brushing across the kitchen counter, the living room chairs, the dusty piano that hadn't been played in years. I paused at the mantel where an old photo still hung me, Henry and the kids, all sunburned and smiling after a summer picnic. I touched the frame. "I'm sorry," I whispered. The knock came. Quiet, steady. Tom stood there like a shadow against the moonlight. "Ready?" he asked. I nodded, couldn't speak. I pulled my coat tight, clutched the satchel to my chest, and stepped into the cold. The air tasted like salt and pine. I didn't look back. If I had, I might have turned to stone. We followed the narrow path down to the road, keeping to the edge where the trees were thickest. The ocean growled behind us. Somewhere in the dark, a gull cried out. I felt it deep in my chest, sharp, lonely, final. Tom opened the truck door and helped me in. "You're doing the right thing," he said, but neither of us believed that yet. The headlights cut through the fog as we drove, painting long white lines on the wet road. I held the satchel close, my fingers locked so tight they ached. The trees passed like ghosts. After a while, Tom spoke. "We'll head to Nora's place first. I called her earlier. She's expecting you." I gave a slight nod, afraid if I opened my mouth, the truth would spill out in a scream. I thought of Eric and Julia, what they were doing, whether they'd noticed I was gone, whether they'd care. Tom kept one hand on the wheel, the other near the flashlight by his side. The silence was heavy, but not cold. It was the kind of silence you share when there's too much to say, and too much already said. Nora's porch light glowed like a star in the fog. Tom parked 2 houses down and turned off the engine. "I'll go first," he said. "Wait until I wave." He stepped out, walked up to the door, and knocked twice. She opened it quick, already wrapped in a robe. When she saw him, her hand flew to her mouth. Then her eyes searched the darkness and found me in the passenger seat. She rushed over before Tom could stop her. "Margaret," she breathed. "Oh my God, what happened?" I got out, legs shaking. She wrapped me up in her arms, warm and solid and smelling like soap and cinnamon. "It's my kids," I choked out. "They tried to—" I couldn't finish. She pulled back just enough to see my face. "What do you mean, tried to?" Tom answered. "There's a setup in the basement. Gas lines, a timer, chemicals. It wasn't accidental." Nora's face went pale. "Lord have mercy." She grabbed my hand. "Come inside." Her house was small, but it felt like safety. Warm, lived in. The walls smelled like cinnamon and old books. Her husband, Walter, looked up from his chair when we came in. His eyes widened. "Margaret? What in the world?" I shook my head, too tired to explain. "I don't know who my kids are anymore." Tom laid it out plainly. Everything he found, what it meant, and how it was still there waiting. Walter didn't interrupt once. When Tom finished, he nodded slowly. "You'll stay here tonight. And Tom, you're staying too. No one comes through that door without going through me first." I sat on the couch, still gripping my satchel. Nora knelt beside me. "I can't believe Eric would do this. He was always so polite, so gentle." I wiped my eyes. "They both were. I don't know where I lost them." Nora shook her head. Some people grow up crooked no matter how straight they were raised. Tom kept watch by the window. We'll stay dark till morning, then go back for evidence. The wind outside never stopped. It roared like it knew the truth now, too. I pictured my house standing alone by the cliff still, quiet, hiding its secrets behind painted ceilings and poisoned air. It didn't look like home anymore. Walter handed me a blanket. "You're safe here," he said. Safe. It didn't feel real yet. But I nodded. I stretched out on the couch. Nora sat with me, her hand on mine. Tom stood near the window like a guard. The fire crackled. Walter's clock ticked steady. I watched the ceiling, praying for sleep, for something soft to hold on to. When sleep finally came, it was light and fragile, like drifting on water. I dreamed of Henry again. He was waiting on the shore, the kids beside him, waving me toward the light. And for a moment, everything was just as it should be. Then I woke. Dawn touched the sky with silver fingers. The world was still quiet. Tom whispered, "Morning's here. We go back soon." Nora poured coffee. "No rush," she said. "Not until you're ready." I took the mug in both hands and felt it warm me from the inside. I looked at these people, not blood, but better than blood. The ones who came when it mattered. Out the window, I saw my house at the edge of the cliffs. It looked calm, it looked innocent, but I knew better. I turned to Tom. "Let's finish this," I said. And he nodded. "We will." The clock struck 6. The wind shifted, and in that tiny moment between fear and forgiveness, I felt something return. Not vengeance, not hatred. Just the will to survive, and the voice to finally be heard. The motel in Crescent Bay sat at the end of an old fishing road, just steps from the shoreline. A 2-story building that had once been white, now streaked with salt and time. Walter pulled the truck beneath a buzzing street lamp and helped me down. The wind carried the scent of low tide and pine needles, sharp, honest, and cold. Tom carried my small satchel, placed it gently on the floral bedspread, and said, "You rest here for a while. I'll be back before sunup." The room was humble. Wallpaper faded like dried wheat, a rust-colored rug, a stiff chair by the window. Outside, the sea stretched wide and gray, like a blanket too big to fold. This wasn't home, but it wasn't poisoned, and that counted for something. Walter promised he'd be in the next room. He checked the deadbolt twice before closing the door. When the truck engine growled to life, I stood at the window and watched the headlights bend around the road heading toward the house that nearly became my grave. Tom was going back. He said he'd gather photos, document the vents, collect air samples. "Anything we can use," he'd said. I'd begged him not to take risks. He'd just smiled, calm as a man who knew what he was walking into. "I've seen worse." I sat at the little desk and opened the drawer. A Gideon Bible, like always. I turned to the first page, but the words blurred. I bowed my head and whispered the only prayer I had left. "Lord, please don't let his kindness cost him everything." The hours slipped by like cold syrup. Outside, the ocean moved in slow breaths, rising and falling in the dark. I tried to lie down. But every groan of the heater, every tap of tree branches on the roof, every footstep from Walter's room, they pulled me back to the blinking red light in my basement. That tiny light, patient and unblinking, like it had been watching me all along. Eventually, I must have drifted. In my sleep, Henry stood on our porch, lantern in hand, calling my name. "It's safe now, Maggie," he said. But when I reached for him, the lantern blew out. I woke with salt on my lips. Then 3 soft knocks, the signal we'd agreed on. I opened the door. Tom stood under the porch lamp, shoulders wet with mist, eyes pale with exhaustion. He stepped in, his jacket carrying the scent of gasoline and cold metal. His silence said everything. "You found something," I said. It wasn't a question. He nodded, pulling a folded receipt from his pocket and placing it on the table. It was from a hardware store, dated 8 weeks back, printed clearly at the top, Ellis and Parker Renovation Supplies. And under that, in David's handwriting, an order for sealants, pressure tanks, tubing, and vents, paid with the company's card. My stomach turned. Tom's voice stayed low. "There's more. On the answering machine, I found a message from Anna. She reminded him to adjust the dosage before Sunday. I recorded it." The room tilted. I grabbed the table's edge until my vision steadied. My children, my own children, had written this plan in ink and audio. No guessing left. No denying. Tom stepped back, giving me space. Walter's outside. We'll hand everything to the sheriff come morning." I sat on the bed, the blanket stiff beneath me. I can't believe they'd do this, not even for money. He sat across from me, placing a thermos of coffee on the table. "I used to think family meant safety," he said. "My brother proved me wrong when he tried to steal our father's land. Cut me out, sold it without telling me. That's when I learned blood doesn't guarantee love. Sometimes strangers do better." I looked down at my trembling hands. "You shouldn't have gone back alone." Tom gave that same quiet smile. "Truth's worth the risk." He pulled a recorder from his coat. Pressed play. A hiss. Then David's voice. "Yeah, it's almost done. She's weak already. Anna says the readings look fine. Just a few more weeks." The tape stopped. The silence that followed was heavier than grief. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. Something inside me cracked, but it didn't make a sound. Tom rubbed his eyes. "Walter knows someone in the sheriff's office. He'll make sure this gets into the right hands." The wind rose. It pressed against the windows like a tide that had lost its patience. I stared at the dark outside. My house was still standing, probably quiet, probably sleeping, but somewhere in the basement, that canister still ticked, a heart beating for the wrong reason. "Do you think they'll be sorry?" I asked. "When this comes out, David and Anna?" Tom took a long breath. "People like that aren't sorry for what they did, just sorry they got caught. But the truth still matters." I wanted to believe him. But part of me, the part that still remembered holding their hands when they were small, still searched for the children I thought I knew. The heater clicked off. The sea whispered beyond the curtains. I whispered too. "Thank you," I said. Tom leaned his head back, eyes closing for just a second. "You rest now. I'll stay up." I lay down. The ceiling above me cracked like a map. Somewhere on that map was a life that still made sense. Tom moved to the window. I heard the quiet click of the camera as he checked the images again. Then the night closed around us, wind, waves, and the hush of truth waiting to be told. The sheriff's office in Westmore Point sat just off Main Street, a low brick building with peeling paint and a flag snapping in the October wind. Inside, the air smelled like burnt coffee and old printer paper. Tom carried the evidence in a worn cardboard box. Photographs, voice recordings, air samples sealed in plastic. Walter held the door for me, his hand firm on my arm like he knew I might collapse. I'd walked into that building 100 times before renewing my tags, dropping off cookies for the deputies at Christmas. Never once did I imagine I'd walk in to turn in my own children. Sheriff Clint Dobson, a thick-set man with kind eyes and a slow drawl, met us halfway across the room. He had known Henry and me since the first year we moved out here. "Margaret," he said gently, "are you all right?" I tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. Tom stepped in. He explained everything. The gas lines in the basement, the vent system, the timed release, the tape recordings. The sheriff listened carefully, no interruptions, but I could see his jaw tightening with every sentence. When Tom was done, Clint let out a long, heavy breath. "Let's hear the recording," he said. Tom placed the small recorder on the desk and pressed play. There was a brief hiss. Then came David's voice, clear, cold, and casual. "She's weak already. Anna says the levels are just right, just a little longer." Then Anna's voice, sharp, clinical, emotionless. "Keep adjusting the timer. Too much, and she might start noticing the smell." The room went silent, except for the low hum of the ceiling fan. I gripped the chair until my fingers burned. The sheriff leaned back slowly. "You're sure it's them?" I nodded. My throat tightened. "That's my son and my daughter." He rubbed his chin. "We'll need a warrant, but this is enough to move on." Tom laid out the rest photos of the basement setup, the canister near the air vent, the tubing, the chemical labels with David's renovation business logo on them. Then the notebook, Anna's handwriting, tidy and deliberate. Each page marked with dosage, times, vents, not guesses. A step-by-step operation. The sheriff looked it over, slowly flipping each page. They planned this like a job, a project. I couldn't look at it anymore. I turned to the window. Sunlight streamed in through the blinds, casting thin lines across the floor. Dust floated there, soft, gentle, innocent. I remembered mornings when David and Anna were toddlers, rolling trucks across the kitchen floor while I dusted the shelves. How had those tiny hands grown into this? Tom leaned close. You don't have to stay through the whole process. I do, I whispered. If I walk out now, I'll never be able to walk back in. The sheriff nodded solemnly. We'll move carefully. They won't see us coming. He stepped out to make the necessary calls. Through the glass, I could hear fragments of conversation: search warrant, air toxicity, possible attempted homicide, both siblings involved. That last word, homicide, landed like a brick in my chest. I wasn't ready to hear it in the same breath as my children's names. Tom brought me a paper cup of water. My hands shook as I drank. There has to be another reason, I said. Something we missed. Some mistake. There isn't, Tom said gently. We saw too much. They meant it. I nodded slowly, but my heart still fought the truth. Some part of me, buried deep, still wanted to protect them. An hour passed. Then Sheriff Dobson returned. We've got a unit en route now, he said. They'll collect everything at the house. We'll test the remaining air. Mrs. Ellis, you'll need to stay here a bit longer. A written statement would help. They handed me a clipboard. My hand trembled so badly I could barely hold the pen. When I finished, I set it down like it weighed 100 pounds. Walter stood outside, speaking on the phone with Nora. His back was turned, but I could see the tension in his shoulders. He had kids too grown and far away, and I knew exactly what was running through his mind. Minutes later, the sheriff returned. We've got the warrant. If they're at home, we'll bring them in quietly. I wanted to go, to see it, to look them in the eye, but Clint shook his head. You don't need to see that. So we waited. Time dragged. The sunlight faded to gray. Every time the office phone rang, I froze. Then, just as dusk settled, Sheriff Dobson stepped back in. His face told me everything. We've got them, he said. Both. They were home. I could barely breathe. Did they say anything? He hesitated. David claimed it was a failed home experiment. But we have their text messages. There's no denying it now. They planned every detail. I curled forward, covering my face. Tom slid beside me and put his arm gently around my shoulders as the sobs came. Hot, wild, unrelenting. I don't hate them, I wept. I wish I did, but I don't know how. Tom didn't speak. He just sat there and held the silence for me, because silence was safer than words. When the storm inside me finally calmed, I wiped my eyes. The sheriff offered to take me back to the motel, but I asked to stay until everything was logged. I needed to be there when the shadows were finally cleared. By the time we left, the night was thick with fog. The streetlights glowed soft yellow. I leaned against Tom's arm as we walked to the truck. Somewhere in the distance, a siren echoed. In that sound, I imagined them, David and Anna, sitting in the back of a police car, hands cuffed, staring straight ahead. I turned to Tom. What happens now? He looked out toward the sea. Now we learn how to live with what we know. We drove back to the motel in silence. The same silence that follows a storm, not peace, but the ache of everything that had been broken. Back in my room, I sat at the edge of the bed, staring at the wall. Tomorrow, there would be questions, headlines, investigations. But tonight, I was just a mother left behind by the children she gave everything to. Outside, the waves crashed against the cliffs, over and over, steady and brutal. But for the first time in days, I whispered the truth aloud. They didn't win. Not yet. Sleep never really came that night. I laid there in the stiff motel bed, eyes open, watching the ceiling as the wind moved the curtains just enough to let in the shadows. Tom and Walter were in the next room, but I might as well have been alone on the moon. Every few minutes, the recording played again in my mind, Daniel's calm, matter-of-fact tone, and Claire's soft, clinical agreement. It wasn't panic. It wasn't hate. It sounded like they were arranging a business deal, not the slow ending of their own mother's life. Grief doesn't always scream. Sometimes it trickles in one thought at a time, one memory at a time, and each one cuts deeper. Little moments began to surface. Things I had shrugged off. Daniel used to call every Sunday, but for the last year, it had been once a month, maybe. And when he did call, it was always about the house repairs, taxes, resale value. "You're sitting on gold, Mom," he said once. "That land's worth more than you think." Claire, always so sweet in her nurse's tone, had started asking about paperwork. "Have you checked your policy lately, Mom? You still have me listed, right?" Her voice was gentle, professional, like she was helping an old patient, Not her mother. I hadn't thought anything of it at the time. I'd told them both the house would stay until I was gone. It was Frank's dream, I'd said, and I'm going to finish it. But now, under this weak motel lamp, I could finally see the truth written clear across every moment I ignored. It was always about money. The policy Frank left behind had been meant as a kindness, a cushion for our children when we were both gone. $700,000. I hadn't thought about it in years. But now I saw it not as a gift, but as bait. To them, it wasn't love or legacy. It was opportunity. I rolled to my side and stared out the window. The Pacific stretched wide and dull under a cloudy moon, the same way it had the night Frank died. And just like then, I felt the hole he left in the room beside me. I remembered a visit from Daniel 6 months back. He showed up unannounced, phone in hand, tapping on walls, opening closets like a contractor. "You could list this place for $850, easy," he said. I had laughed, thinking he was being silly. He didn't laugh back. Not long after, Claire called, her voice syrupy as ever. "You're still paying all your bills, right, Mom? I just worry about you being alone." Now I knew better. They weren't concerned. They were calculating. It hit me like a second betrayal. Every dinner we'd shared, every gift they gave, every hug. Was all of it wrapped in expectation? Did they smile through holidays knowing what they'd planned? There were no tears left in me, just a cold void. A place where family had lived. By the time Tom knocked in the morning, I was already dressed. He came in with 2 steaming cups and didn't say much, just handed me mine and sat down across from me, as if we were partners in some unspeakable war. "They'll ask about motive," he said eventually. "You'll have to say what you told me." "It's the policy," I said flatly. "That's what this was all for, Frank's money." He didn't argue. Money makes people forget who they are. "They didn't need it," I said. "Daniel's got a business. Claire's working in a private clinic now. They wanted it faster, that's all." Tom nodded slowly. It wasn't about need. It was about control. That word. Daniel had always needed to be in charge. Even when he was 5, he couldn't stand being told no. When Frank said we couldn't afford a new bike that summer, he sulked for days. Claire was always his shadow, trying to smooth things over, make him look better. It was the same pattern, just grown up, and much, much darker. I turned to the window. Rain had started again, light and cold, slipping down the glass like it was trying to wash away what I'd seen. "Frank would have stopped this," I said. "He would have known." "He'd be proud of you," Tom replied, "for standing in the fire and not backing down." I wanted to believe him. I really did. But the weight in my chest told me otherwise. A deputy stopped by mid-morning with a quiet knock. The evidence was logged. Daniel and Claire were being held. There would be questioning, then charges. I thanked him, closed the door softly, turned back to Tom. "You've been strong," he said, "but this gets messier from here. Trials, people talking." "I know," I whispered. "I'm ready." "You don't have to carry hate, Evelyn." "I don't. That's what hurts most." The afternoon crawled by. I stood outside under the motel overhang while Walter made calls and Tom read the paper. The air smelled like salt and old pavement. Across the street, the ocean crashed into the rocks with the same rhythm it had always had. I wondered how it could stay the same when everything else had changed. Later, the motel phone rang. It was Nora, her voice cracking. "I saw the news. Are you all right?" "I'm safe," I said. "That's all I can promise right now." She didn't pry. Old friends don't. She just said, "Come stay with me. My guest room is yours." "I'll come soon." When I hung up, I realized the clouds had parted slightly. A weak ray of sunlight broke through, lighting the wet parking lot like gold foil. It didn't fix anything, but it reminded me that time still moved forward. I went back inside. Tom and Walter looked up. "I'm ready," I said, "for whatever comes next." That night, just as I sat down with a blanket and a mug of tea, the motel phone rang again. I knew that voice before he even said a word. "Mom," Daniel said, voice strained. "Where are you? We need to talk." My stomach clenched. Outside, the storm was rising again. Wind howled against the glass, and the night thickened. He was coming back into my life not as a son, but as the man who nearly killed me. Sleep never really came that night. I laid there in the stiff motel bed, eyes open, watching the ceiling as the wind moved the curtains just enough to let in the shadows. Tom and Walter were in the next room, but I might as well have been alone on the moon. Every few minutes, the recording played again in my mind, Daniel's calm, matter-of-fact tone and Claire's soft clinical agreement. It wasn't panic, it wasn't hate. It sounded like they were arranging a business deal, not the slow ending of their own mother's life. Grief doesn't always scream. Sometimes it trickles in one thought at a time, one memory at a time, and each one cuts deeper. Little moments began to surface. Things I had shrugged off. Daniel used to call every Sunday, but for the last year it had been once a month, maybe. And when he did call, it was always about the house repairs, taxes, resale value. "You're sitting on gold, Mom," he said once. "That land's worth more than you think." Claire, always so sweet in her nurse's tone, had started asking about paperwork. "Have you checked your policy lately, Mom? You still have me listed, right?" Her voice was gentle, professional, like she was helping an old patient, not her mother. I hadn't thought anything of it at the time. I'd told them both the house would stay until I was gone. It was Frank's dream, I'd said, and I'm going to finish it. But now, under this weak motel lamp, I could finally see the truth written clear across every moment I ignored. It was always about money. The policy Frank left behind had been meant as a kindness, a cushion for our children when we were both gone. $700,000. I hadn't thought about it in years. But now I saw it not as a gift but as bait. To them, it wasn't love or legacy, it was opportunity. I rolled to my side and stared out the window. The Pacific stretched wide and dull under a cloudy moon, the same way it had the night Frank died. And just like then, I felt the hole he left in the room beside me. I remembered a visit from Daniel, 6 months back. He showed up unannounced, phone in hand, tapping on walls, opening closets like a contractor. "You could list this place for $850, easy," he said. I had laughed, thinking he was being silly. He didn't laugh back. Not long after, Claire called, her voice syrupy as ever. "You're still paying all your bills, right, Mom? I just worry about you being alone." Now I knew better. They weren't concerned. They were calculating. It hit me like a second betrayal. Every dinner we'd shared, every gift they gave, every hug. Was all of it wrapped in expectation? Did they smile through holidays knowing what they'd planned? There were no tears left in me, just a cold void, a place where family had lived. By the time Tom knocked in the morning, I was already dressed. He came in with 2 steaming cups and didn't say much, just handed me mine and sat down across from me, as if we were partners in some unspeakable war. "They'll ask about motive," he said eventually. "You'll have to say what you told me." "It's the policy," I said flatly. "That's what this was all for. Frank's money." He didn't argue. "Money makes people forget who they are." "They didn't need it," I said. "Daniel's got a business. Claire's working in a private clinic now. They wanted it faster, that's all." Tom nodded slowly. It wasn't about need. It was about control. That word. Daniel had always needed to be in charge. Even when he was 5, he couldn't stand being told no. When Frank said we couldn't afford a new bike that summer, he sulked for days. Claire was always his shadow, trying to smooth things over, make him look better. It was the same pattern. Just grown up. And much, much darker. I turned to the window. Rain had started again, light and cold, slipping down the glass like it was trying to wash away what I'd seen. "Frank would have stopped this," I said. "He would have known." "He'd be proud of you," Tom replied, "for standing in the fire and not backing down." I wanted to believe him. I really did. But the weight in my chest told me otherwise. A deputy stopped by mid-morning with a quiet knock. The evidence was logged. Daniel and Claire were being held. There would be questioning, then charges. I thanked him, closed the door softly, turned back to Tom. "You've been strong," he said, "but this gets messier from here. Trials, people talking." "I know," I whispered. "I'm ready." "You don't have to carry hate, Evelyn." "I don't. That's what hurts most." The afternoon crawled by. I stood outside under the motel overhang while Walter made calls and Tom read the paper. The air smelled like salt and old pavement. Across the street, the ocean crashed into the rocks with the same rhythm it had always had. I wondered how it could stay the same when everything else had changed. Later, the motel phone rang. It was Nora, her voice cracking. "I saw the news. Are you all right?" "I'm safe," I said. That's all I can promise right now. She didn't pry. Old friends don't. She just said, "Come stay with me. My guest room is yours." "I'll come soon." When I hung up, I realized the clouds had parted slightly. A weak ray of sunlight broke through, lighting the wet parking lot like gold foil. It didn't fix anything, but it reminded me that time still moved forward. I went back inside. Tom and Walter looked up. "I'm ready," I said, "for whatever comes next." That night, just as I sat down with a blanket and a mug of tea, the motel phone rang again. I knew that voice before he even said a word. "Mom," Daniel said, voice strained, "where are you? We need to talk." My stomach clenched. Outside, the storm was rising again. Wind howled against the glass, and the night thickened. He was coming back into my life not as a son, but as the man who nearly killed me. The courthouse smelled like rain and old paper. I sat on a stiff wooden bench, hands knotted in my lap, the full weight of the past year pressing down on my shoulders. The storm from the night before had swept through Westmore Point, shaking trees and flooding gutters. But no amount of wind or water could scrub away what my heart still carried. Across the courtroom, Daniel sat in a dark suit, probably the same one he'd worn to Frank's funeral. I recognized it, even if I couldn't recognize the man wearing it. His face was pale, lips pressed together so tightly they'd gone colorless. Beside him sat Claire, her hair pulled down over her face, head bowed low. She didn't look up once. I tried not to stare, but my eyes kept finding them, just like a mother's heart always finds her children, even in a room filled with strangers and silence. The prosecutor stood and began to speak. Calm, clear, confident. Her voice filled the space, laying out each fact like bricks on a wall. The photographs Tom had taken in the basement, the chemical breakdowns from the air samples, the voice recordings. Every word struck harder than the last. Every sentence chiseled away at the last few pieces of the love I had fought to hold on to. People in the gallery turned to glance at me, some with pity, some with disbelief. I didn't blame them. No one wants to believe that children can plot against their own blood. But I was living proof that sometimes love doesn't protect you. Sometimes it's the very thing they use against you. Then they played the tape. Daniel's voice filled the room, clear and calm as ever. "She's weak already. Just a few more weeks." A hush fell. Then murmurs. One man in the back gasped. Claire's body curled into itself. Her shoulders shook. She covered her ears and whimpered like a child. Still, I didn't look away. I couldn't afford to anymore. It was my duty now to witness, to tell the truth, to stand in the storm they had created. When it was time to speak, they called my name. I stood, knees trembling but heart solid. I looked at the jury, then at the judge. "I'm not here for revenge," I began, voice steady, even as my insides churned. "I'm here because truth matters, because a mother should never have to fear her own children, and yet I did." A long silence followed. You could hear the rain still tapping softly at the windows. Daniel stared at his shoes. Claire wouldn't lift her head. I don't know if my words reached them. I wasn't saying them for their sake. The defense tried what they could. Stress, financial hardship, misjudgment. They called it a misguided solution to a complex problem. But even their lawyer couldn't hide behind that for long. The facts were too clean, too calculated. The jury left the room. I didn't pray while they were gone. I just waited, hands clenched tight on my knees, staring at the grain in the floorboards and thinking about Daniel at 6 years old, handing me dandelions. Claire at 10, braiding her doll's hair while I cooked dinner. They returned in just under 2 hours. The foreman stood. "Guilty on all counts," he said. There was no applause. No shouting, just the cold sound of justice settling into place. Claire broke into sobs, full and heaving. Daniel didn't cry. His face was still as stone, but his jaw twitched once just enough to let me know he had heard the finality. The judge's voice echoed across the room. Sentenced to 23 years. The number didn't feel real. It didn't land the way I thought it would. 23 years. That's how long I had been a mother before Frank died. That's how long they would now spend behind bars. I sat down again. The courtroom spun a little. I closed my eyes and breathed, slow and steady. I had dreamed of seeing them graduate, of weddings, of grandchildren, of holidays at my house, the same house Daniel tried to take from me with poison and lies. Instead, I saw them being led away in handcuffs. The sound of metal against wrist echoed louder than any thunder I'd heard the night before. Tom was beside me. I didn't even see him move. His hand was warm on my shoulder, grounding me. "You did the right thing," he said softly. "I know," I whispered. "But right doesn't always feel good." The courtroom began to clear. Lawyers and reporters filtered out. Family members from both sides stood in the aisles, hugging, whispering, avoiding my eyes. I stayed where I was until the room was nearly empty. I needed those final moments to absorb it all, to understand the weight of what had just happened. When I finally stepped outside, the clouds were parting, just barely. Thin streaks of light cut through the sky, touching the steps of the courthouse like some small, hesitant blessing. The air smelled of salt again, just like home. That night, I returned to the motel and packed my bags for the last time. I didn't cry. There were no more tears left. What came next wasn't grief, it was something quieter. A blank page. A new season. I left Westmore Point at sunrise. The road curved gently along the coast, leading me back toward Crescent Bay and the tiny cottage I'd purchased near the shore. It wasn't fancy. One bedroom, squeaky floors, a narrow porch with chipped paint, but it was mine. And more importantly, it was a place no one had tried to take from me. As I pulled into the gravel driveway, the sea greeted me like an old friend, steady, endless, forgiving nothing but forgetting nothing either. I opened the front door. The scent of fresh wood and sea air wrapped around me. I stepped inside and whispered, "This is mine." A year drifted by quietly, like fog rolling in from the coast, soft, steady, and impossible to hold. The old house by the bluffs was gone now. I sold it to a young couple with eager eyes and hands full of blueprints. They said they loved the sound of waves crashing at night. I smiled and signed the papers. I never went back. Some places, no matter how beautiful, hold too much pain to ever feel like home again. Now I live in a white cottage near Seabrook, close enough to hear the gulls in the morning and the hush of the tides at night. Nora lives just 2 doors down, and Walter still visits most afternoons, carrying groceries in one hand and town gossip in the other. Tom stops by every Thursday, toolbox in his truck bed, or a pie his sister made wrapped in foil. He always tips his hat before leaving, like a gentleman from another time. Life is keener now, softer. I grow herbs in the garden: lavender, mint, thyme, the kind of things you rub between your fingers when you need to remember what calm feels like. On rainy days, I bake. On sunny ones, I walk down to the harbor church. The women there have become my people. We sit after service with lukewarm coffee and talk about sore joints, stubborn children, and the weather. And sometimes when the stained glass catches the light just right, I tell pieces of my story. Family isn't always blood, I say. Sometimes it's who stays when everything else falls apart. They nod. Sometimes someone reaches across the table to squeeze my hand. We don't need many words. Forgiveness took its time. I didn't think I'd ever find it. I carried anger like a coat in summer, too heavy, too warm, but too familiar to let go of. But time, like the sea, wears down even the jagged rocks, slowly, quietly. During the trial, I wrote letters to Daniel and Claire, not to scold them, not to accuse, just to say what was true in my heart. I told them I hoped they'd find the truth inside themselves, even if it took years. The first few letters came back unopened, but I kept writing, once a month, like planting seeds I didn't expect to bloom. Then last week, one came back, but this time, it had been opened. Inside was a short note, written in a hand I hadn't seen in years. "Mom, I'm sorry. Not for getting caught, but for forgetting who you were. Maybe someday, you can forgive me. Claire." I read it 3 times, then held it to my chest. The tears didn't fall like a flood. They came gently, like spring rain. Not a storm, just release. I folded that note and placed it in my Bible, tucked between pages of Psalms, where sorrow and hope live side by side. It didn't undo what had happened, but it shaped the pain into something that didn't cut as deep. Last night we sat on the porch, me, Tom, Nora, and Walter. We watched the sun melt into the sea, painting the sky with gold and fire. The wind carried the smell of salt and warm earth. I leaned back in my chair, hands wrapped around a mug of tea. "I think Frank would have liked it here," I said. Tom nodded. "He'd be proud of you, Evelyn." Maybe he would. Maybe he already is. There's still a long road ahead. Healing never finishes it, just changes shape. Some days the past still knocks on my heart like a memory I didn't invite. But other days, I wake up to the sound of waves and gulls and feel peace settle in my bones. That's enough for now. If this story meant something to you, if it stirred your heart, even for a moment, please press like. And if it didn't, write the number 6 inches the comments so I can listen and do better. Subscribe if you believe that even in betrayal, love still finds a way back home.